3 women had fled the Mancini estate in the last week alone. One left in tears, one left threatening a lawsuit, and the last one left without her shoes because she ran so fast. They said Dante Mancini was a monster, a ruthless capo who ran New York with an iron fist. But the rumors whispered that his 3 6-year-old sons were the real danger. They were unmanageable, ferocious, broken. Enter Aria Penelope, a broke single mother with $42 in her bank account and nothing left to lose. She didn't know she was walking into a war zone. She didn't know the man in the shadows was watching her every move. And she certainly didn't know that a plate of caramelized bacon and a secret lullaby would change the fate of the most dangerous family in the city. Aria Penelope stared at the heavy iron gates of the Mancini estate, rain plastering her cheap blazer to her skin. The Uber driver had refused to drive up the driveway. He'd dropped her at the curb, muttered a prayer, and sped off. She gripped the handle of her worn suitcase until her knuckles turned white. Do it for Mia, she told herself. Just get the paycheck. Her daughter Mia was staying with a neighbor. Aria had exactly 48 hours to secure this job and the Ad Penelope payment, or they would be evicted. The stakes weren't just high, they were absolute. She buzzed the intercom. Name, a voice barked, rough, gravelly. Aria Penelope. The agency sent me. For the position. A buzzing sound followed, and the gates groaned open. The walk up the driveway was a mile of perfectly manicured intimidation. The house wasn't a home. It was a fortress of grey stone and black glass, looming against the stormy sky. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Aria had grown up in Queens. She knew what private security looked like, and she knew what Mafia muscle looked like. These men were the latter. When the heavy oak front door swung open, she wasn't greeted by a butler. She was greeted by chaos. A priceless Ming vase shattered against the wall just inches from her head. Shards of blue and white porcelain rained down on her wet shoes. "I hate you, get out!" a child's voice screamed. Aria didn't flinch. She simply brushed a ceramic shard off her shoulder and looked up. Standing at the top of the grand staircase were 3 identical boys with mops of curly black hair and eyes like storm clouds. The Mancini triplets, Leo Matteo and Enzo. "Nice aim," Aria called out, her voice steady. "But if you're trying to scare me, you'll need to do better than pottery." The boys froze. They were used to screams. They were used to fear. They weren't used to a soaking wet woman in a thrift store suit criticizing their throwing arm. Enough! The single word sucked the oxygen out of the massive foyer. Aria turned. Walking out of the shadows of the library was a man who looked like he had been carved out of marble and nightmares. Dante Mancini. He was taller than he looked in the paparazzi photos, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the city's underworld. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Aria's entire life earnings. His eyes were dark, devoid of light, and currently fixed on her with lethal intensity. "Mr. Mancini," Aria said, forcing her chin up. "You're late." Dante said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't apologize for the vase. He walked past her, smelling of expensive scotch and gun oil, and signaled for her to follow. Inside his office, the atmosphere was suffocating. Dante sat behind a massive mahogany desk, not even looking at her resume. "The agency says you're desperate," Dante said, coldly flipping a file open. "Widowed, single child. Eviction notice pending. You need money, Ms. Penelope. That makes you dangerous. It makes me motivated, Arya countered, suppressing the shiver running down her spine. I need this job. You need someone who won't run away when your sons throw a tantrum. I think we're a match. Dante finally looked up. His gaze was predatory, analyzing her for weakness. My sons are not having tantrums. They are grieving, and they are angry. They have driven away 5 nannies this month. The last one lasted 6 hours. He leaned forward. If you last 48 hours, I will pay your debts, all of them. If you leave before then, you get nothing. Arya's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a deal with the devil. But she thought of Mia sleeping on a neighbor's couch. Deal, she whispered. But I do it my way. No guards in the nursery. No interference. Dante's eyes narrowed, a flicker of amusement or perhaps danger crossing his face. You have until Monday morning, Ms. Penelope. Try not to die. The first 6 hours were psychological warfare. Arya was given a guest room that was nicer than any apartment she'd ever rented, but she didn't have time to enjoy the 1,000 thread count sheets. The moment she entered the children's wing, the assault began. It started with the accident. Arya walked into the playroom to find a complex tripwire made of fishing line strung across the doorframe. She stepped over it, casually spotting it only because she used to set similar traps for her brother. You missed a spot, she said to the empty room. Giggles erupted from the closet. By dinner time, things escalated. The cook, a terrified woman named Maria, shoved a tray of food at Arya and refused to enter the dining room. They bite, Maria whispered, crossing herself. Arya took the tray. Spaghetti and meatballs. Simple. She walked into the dining room where the 3 boys sat at a long table looking like miniature boardroom executives plotting a hostile takeover. Eat, Arya said, placing the plates down. It's poisoned, Leo, the leader of the trio, said defiantly. He crossed his arms. Papa says never eat food you didn't see prepared. Arya sat down, took a fork, and took a massive bite from Leo's plate. She chewed slowly, swallowed, and waited. Not poisoned. Just a little heavy on the oregano. Now eat. Matteo and Enzo looked at Leo. Leo narrowed his eyes. You're not afraid of Papa. I'm afraid of starving, Arya said honestly. And I'm afraid of wasting food. They didn't eat much, but they didn't throw the plates. It was a small victory. However, the night was far from over. At 2:00 a.m., the fire alarm ripped through the house. Arya bolted out of bed, grabbing her robe. She ran into the hallway, colliding hard with a solid wall of muscle. Dante. He was shirtless, a gun in his hand, his chest heaving. Where are they? He barked, checking the corners. The boys, Arya gasped. False alarm! A security guard shouted from the end of the hall. Someone pulled the lever in the east wing. Dante lowered the gun, the muscles in his back rippling with tension. He turned to Arya, his eyes blazing. Control them, Ms. Penelope, or leave. He stormed off, leaving Arya standing there, shaken not by the alarm, but by the raw, terrifying power of the man. He wasn't just a father. He was a soldier, constantly expecting an attack. The next day, hour 24, was worse. They glued her shoes to the floor. They hid her phone. Enzo, the quietest one, looked her dead in the eye and told her that his mother was coming back, so she should just leave. That broke Arya's heart. She knew the file. Their mother had died in a car bombing 2 years ago, a hit meant for Dante. By the evening of the second day, Arya was exhausted. Her hair was a mess, her clothes were stained with paint, another trap, and her patience was fraying. She sat on the floor of the hallway, head in her hands. Dante walked by. He paused, looking down at her. For a second, the mask slipped. He looked tired. "The car is waiting to take you to the train station," he said quietly. "You almost made it." Arya looked up. "I have 12 hours left." "You look defeated." "I look like a mother," she snapped, standing up. "And I'm not going anywhere." Dante stared at her, a strange heat flaring in his eyes. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Why? Why stay?" "They hate you." "They don't hate me, Dante," she said, using his first name for the first time. "They hate that they're lonely. And frankly, so are you." The silence stretched thick and dangerous. Dante looked like he might kiss her or strangle her. "Be careful, Arya. You see things that aren't there." He walked away, but he didn't order the car. The turning point came the next morning, hour 47. The boys refused to get out of bed. They were on a hunger strike. The house staff was in a panic. Dante was shouting into his phone in Italian, pacing the foyer, clearly at his wits' end. Arya walked into the kitchen. She bypassed the terrified chef. She opened the fridge. "Flour, milk, eggs, bacon, brown sugar, cinnamon," she ordered. She worked quickly. The smell began to waft through the ventilation system. It wasn't the smell of a gourmet chef's complex creation. It was the smell of comfort. Warm, sweet, fatty, salty comfort. She carried the platter up to the boys' room. She didn't demand they open the door. She just sat on the floor outside their room with the plate. "It's a shame," she said loudly to herself. "This caramelized bacon is the best I've ever made. And these pancakes have chocolate chips inside. I guess I'll have to eat them all." She took a bite, making an exaggerated noise of delight. The door creaked open. 3 pairs of eyes peered out. "Chocolate chips," Enzo whispered. "And secret syrup," Arya said. "But you have to sit with me. Here, on the floor, on the picnic style." Slowly, warily, they came out. They sat. They ate. And then for the first time in 2 years, the house was filled with the sound of children laughing as Arya wiped syrup off Matteo's nose. Arya didn't see him, but Dante was watching from the end of the hall. He stood frozen, his hand gripping the doorframe. He hadn't heard that sound since his wife died. He looked at the woman sitting on the floor in her stained clothes feeding his wild sons, and felt something in his chest crack. The 48 hours were up. She had won. But as Arya looked up and locked eyes with the Mafia Don, she realized the real danger was just beginning. Because now she wasn't just the nanny. She was the woman who had breached his fortress, and Dante Mancini was a man who never let go of what belonged to him. The check sat on the mahogany desk between them. It was a slip of paper, but to Arya it was freedom. It was rent for a year. It was new shoes for Mia. It was air in her lungs. Dante Mancini watched her stare at it. He was leaning back in his leather chair, the shadows of the library cutting across his face, making his sharp cheekbones look even more severe. He hadn't spoken since he summoned her from the hallway where she'd fed his sons. "You won," Dante said finally. His voice wasn't celebratory. It was resigned, like a general admitting a tactical defeat. "The debt is cleared. The money is yours." Arya reached for the check, her fingers trembling slightly. She expected him to dismiss her. Take the money and run. Her instincts screamed. Get Mia and go. However, Dante continued, his hand landing on the desk with a heavy thud, stopping her retreat before she even moved. "We have a problem." Arya froze. "I survived the 48 hours. We had a deal. The deal was for the money. The problem is the boys." Dante stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling, rain-soaked grounds. He looked like a prisoner in his own kingdom. They haven't eaten a full meal in weeks. They haven't laughed in 2 years. Today they did both. He turned to face her. The intensity in his eyes stole her breath. "If you leave now, you destroy the progress. You rip the bandage off a wound that just started to clot. I cannot let you do that." "You can't let me." Arya's spine straightened. "Mr. Mancini, I have a daughter who is currently sleeping on a neighbor's sofa because I can't bring her here. I can't live in this fortress. I have a life. Bring her." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Arya blinked. "Excuse me." "Bring your daughter. Mia, is it?" Dante walked back to the desk, his movements fluid and predatory. "I have 5 guest wings. I have private security that rivals the Secret Service. Your daughter will be safer here than anywhere in Queens. You will live here. You will care for my sons, and in exchange I will triple the salary. You want me to move my 6-year-old child into the home of the most dangerous man in New York?" Arya asked, her voice rising. "A house where vases are thrown at guests, where the windows are bulletproof for a reason." Dante stopped inches from her. She could smell the soap on his skin and the faint metallic scent of danger that clung to him. He towered over her, but he didn't lean in to intimidate. He leaned in to plead, though a man like him would never call it that. "I am dangerous to my enemies, Arya," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "But to those under my protection, I am the safest place on earth. My sons need you. And I think perhaps you need this security more than you admit." He was right, and that terrified her. The move-in happened in a blur of black SUVs and silent movers. When Arya brought Mia through the front doors the next afternoon, the house felt different. It was holding its breath. Mia was small for her age, clutching a raggedy stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide as she took in the marble floors and the chandelier that looked like frozen tears. "Mummy, is this a castle?" Mia whispered. "Sort of baby." Arya squeezed her hand. "But remember the rules. Stay close to me." The encounter happened on the stairs. The triplets, Leo, Matteo, and Enzo, appeared at the railing like gargoyles. They stared down at Mia. Mia stared up at them. Arya braced herself for an insult, a prank, or a scream. Leo, the ringleader, narrowed his eyes. "What is that?" "I'm Mia." Her daughter piped up, her voice trembling but brave. "I'm 6. "We're 6, Enzo whispered, tilting his head. Matteo pointed at the rabbit. "That rabbit has only 1 ear." "He was in the war," Mia said solemnly. For a long, agonizing minute, silence stretched. Then Leo descended 1 step, then another. He stopped in front of Mia. He looked at the rabbit, then at her shoes, then at Arya. "Does she eat pancakes too?" Leo asked Arya. "She does," Arya said, letting out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Fine," Leo decided. "She can see the playroom, but she can't touch the red truck. The red truck is mine." It wasn't a hug, but in the Mancini household, it was a peace treaty. Later that night, the house settled into a heavy silence. Arya had tucked Mia into a bed that looked like it belonged to a princess. Unable to sleep, Arya wandered down to the kitchen for water. The house was dark shadows, stretching long across the floor. As she passed the library, the door was slightly ajar. She heard the clinking of glass. She shouldn't look. She should keep walking. But curiosity was a dangerous drug. Arya peeked inside. Dante was sitting in an armchair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. But he wasn't alone. His head of security, a scarred man named Silas, stood by the fireplace. The shipment at the docks was compromised, Silas was saying, his voice low. The Russo family is getting bold, Dante. They know you're distracted. They know about the new nanny. Arya's heart stopped. Dante took a slow sip, his eyes staring into the fire. Let them come. If they step 1 foot on this property, I will burn their entire lineage to the ground. They aren't just targeting the business anymore, Silas warned. They're looking for weaknesses, the boys, the woman. Dante stood up, shattering the glass in his hand against the fireplace grate. The violence was sudden, explosive. The woman is not a weakness. She is staff. She is nothing. Arya stepped back, a sharp pain in her chest. She is nothing. She turned to flee, but her foot scuffed against the marble. Dante's head snapped toward the door. Who's there? Arya froze. She stepped into the light of the doorway, clutching her robe. Just me. Getting water. I didn't mean to interrupt. Dante's face was a mask of cold fury. But as he looked at her bare feet, her messy hair, the vulnerability in her eyes, the anger seemed to drain, replaced by something darker, hotter. He dismissed Silas with a wave of his hand. The guard left, closing the door, leaving them alone in the dim, firelit room. How much did you hear? Dante asked, walking toward her. Enough to know I'm a target, Arya said, her voice shaking. And enough to know I'm nothing to you. Dante stopped. He looked down at his hand where a small cut from the glass was bleeding. He didn't seem to feel it. I said that to protect you, Arya, he murmured. If my enemies think you matter to me, you become a pawn. If they think you are nothing, you are safe. And do I? Arya whispered, looking up at him. Do I matter? Dante reached out. For a second she thought he would touch her face. His hand hovered inches from her cheek, the heat radiating from his skin to hers. The air between them crackled with unsaid words, with a magnetic pull that defied logic. You are the only person who has made my sons smile in 730 days, Dante said hoarsely. You matter too much, and that is why you should have left. He pulled his hand back as if burned, turned his back on her, and stared into the fire. Go to bed, Arya. Lock your door. 3 days passed in a strange, fragile calm. Arya settled into a routine. She made breakfast, always with a secret ingredient, to keep the boys engaged. She mediated arguments over Lego blocks. She watched as Mia slowly integrated herself into the triplets' fierce little pack. Surprisingly, the boys became protective of her. When Mia fell and scraped her knee in the garden, Enzo was the one who ran for a bandage, and Matteo threatened to punch the ground for hurting her. But the shadow of Dante's conversation with Silas hung over Arya. She felt eyes on her constantly. The guards at the perimeter seemed to double. The gates never opened. On Thursday, the sun finally broke through the grey New York clouds. The estate's gardens were magnificent, a labyrinth of high hedges, rose bushes, and stone fountains. Arya decided the children needed fresh air. She sat on a stone bench, watching Mia and the boys chase each other through the rose garden. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers. For a moment, she forgot the Mafia, the guns, and the brooding man in the high tower. "They look normal," a voice said. Arya jumped. Dante was standing behind the bench. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, just a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and ink, a tattoo of a cross wrapped around his left wrist. "They are normal," Arya said, moving over to give him space. To her surprise, he sat down next to her. The bench wasn't large. His thigh brushed against her dress. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her. "They weren't," Dante corrected. "Not until you. You have a gift, Arya." "It's not a gift. It's just listening. Children scream when they don't feel heard." She looked at him sideways. "Adults do too. They just use different methods, like breaking glasses." Dante let out a sound that was almost a chuckle. It transformed his face, taking 10 years off his age. "Touché." They sat in silence, watching the children. It was peaceful, intimate. It felt like they were a couple watching their brood, not a boss and his employee. "How did she die?" Arya asked softly. She felt it was time. Dante's smile vanished. The ice returned. "Car bomb. We were leaving a gala. I was supposed to drive, but I took a call. She got in first. I watched it happen from the steps." Arya's hand flew to her mouth. "Dante, I'm so sorry." "The boys were in the back seat," he said, his voice void of emotion, which was worse than crying. "The blast threw the car, but the armored chassis held the back intact. They screamed for her while the fire took her. I couldn't get the door open. My security had to drag me away." He looked at Arya, his eyes black pits of torment. "That is why they are broken. That is why I am a monster. I failed to protect the only thing that mattered." Arya didn't think. She reached out and covered his hand with hers. His skin was cold. "You aren't a monster, Dante. You're a man who is still burning in that fire." Dante looked at their joined hands. He didn't pull away this time. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. His grip was strong, desperate. He looked at her mouth, his gaze dropping, darkening. "Arya," he whispered. The air grew thin. He leaned in. Arya's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wanted him to kiss her. God help her. She wanted the monster to kiss her. Crack. The sound wasn't loud. It sounded like a dry branch snapping. But Dante moved with terrifying speed. Before Arya could blink, Dante had tackled her off the bench, driving her into the dirt behind the stone structure. "Stay down," he roared. Another crack. A chunk of the stone bench, where Arya's head had been a second ago, exploded into dust. A sniper. "Boys, get down." Dante screamed, his voice echoing across the garden like a thunderclap. Across the lawn, the children froze. Mia screamed. "Silas!" Dante bellowed into his lapel microphone, his body covering Arya's, shielding her completely. "Sector 4. We are under 4. Get the children." Arya couldn't breathe. Her face was pressed into the grass, the heavy weight of Dante's body, crushing her, protecting her. She could feel his heart pounding against her back, not in fear, but in the rapid, controlled rhythm of a predator entering combat. "Dante, the kids," she sobbed into the dirt. "Mia! Silas has them." Dante growled in her ear. "Don't move. If you lift your head, you die." Gunfire erupted from the perimeter wall, rapid automatic fire from Dante's guards returning the engagement. The peace of the garden was shattered by the chaotic symphony of war. Dante shifted, pulling a handgun from the holster at the small of his back. He looked down at her, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes wild. "I told you," he hissed, his voice laced with a terrifying mixture of rage and adrenaline. "I told you to leave. Now you are in the war." He didn't wait for an answer. He rolled off her, crouching low, and began to fire back toward the tree line. As Arya lay trembling in the dirt, watching the man she had almost kissed turn into a killer, she realized the truth. The romantic tension wasn't the danger. The caramelized bacon wasn't the solution. The Russo family hadn't just sent a warning. They had declared an execution, and Arya Penelope was no longer just the nanny. She was collateral damage. The world had shrunk to the size of a panic room. It was located behind a false bookcase in the basement, a space of reinforced steel and sterile recycled air. It didn't look like a bunker. It looked like a luxury apartment without windows. But the lack of natural light was oppressive. It felt like a tomb. Arya sat on the edge of a leather sofa, her hands trembling as she stroked Mia's hair. Her daughter had finally fallen asleep, clutching the one-eared rabbit, exhausted from the adrenaline crash. The triplets were huddled together on the floor, playing a silent game of cards. They weren't crying. They weren't asking questions. Their stoicism was more heartbreaking than any tears. They were soldiers in miniature, waiting for the all-clear. The heavy steel door groaned and hissed as the hydraulic seals disengaged. Arya flinched, pulling Mia's sleeping form closer. Dante walked in. He had shed his suit jacket. His white shirt was ruined, stained with grass dirt, and a bloom of crimson on his left shoulder that was spreading with terrifying speed. Silas followed him, looking grim, holding a tablet and speaking into an earpiece. "Secure the perimeter," Dante ordered, his voice devoid of inflection. "If a squirrel crosses the lawn, I want to know about it, and find out how they knew we were in the garden. That schedule was not public." Silas nodded once and retreated the heavy door, sealing them in again. Dante stood in the center of the room. He looked like a caged animal. The energy radiating off him was volatile, a mix of homicidal rage and terrified protectiveness. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of dirt on his forehead. He didn't look at Arya. He looked at the boys. He counted them. 1, 2, 3. Then he looked at Mia. 4. Only then did his eyes slide to Arya. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question was a demand, not a courtesy. "No," Arya whispered. She gently shifted Mia off her lap onto the cushions and stood up. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced them to hold her weight. She walked toward him. "But you are." Dante looked down at his shoulder, as if surprised to find it attached to his body. "It's a graze. Debris from the bench. It's nothing. It's bleeding through the fabric, Dante. Sit down. I need to make calls. I need to—" "Sit down." Arya's voice wasn't loud, but it was steel. She pointed to the armchair in the corner. For a moment, Dante looked ready to argue. His jaw worked, a muscle feathering in his cheek. But the adrenaline was fading, leaving him gray-faced. He sank into the chair with a heavy exhale that sounded like a surrender. Arya went to the emergency medical kit mounted on the wall. She had checked its contents, earlier habit of a mother who was always prepared for scrapes and bruises. She grabbed scissors, antiseptic gauze, and tape. She knelt between his legs. The intimacy of the position was immediate and overwhelming. She could smell the gunpowder on him, mixed with the iron scent of blood and his own musk. "This will ruin the shirt," she murmured, bringing the scissors to his sleeve. "Buy me a new one," he rasped. She cut the fabric away. The wound was ugly, a deep gash where where a stone shard had sliced through the deltoid muscle. It wasn't a bullet hole, but it was deep and angry. Arya soaked a gauze pad in antiseptic. This is going to sting. Dante didn't even blink. He watched her face as she worked. He watched her brow furrow in concentration, the way she bit her lower lip. "You didn't scream," Dante said softly. "In the garden. Most people scream." "I was too busy trying not to die," Arya said, her hands steady, despite the racing of her heart. She pressed the gauze to the wound. "And I knew screaming wouldn't stop a bullet. You taught me that." Not with words," she said, glancing up at him. Their faces were inches apart. "With how you live. Panic is a luxury. We don't have that luxury right now." Dante's eyes searched hers, looking for the fear he expected to find. Instead, he found resolve. He reached out with his good hand and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His thumb grazed her cheekbone, lingering there. "I almost got you killed," he whispered. The confession hung heavy in the recycled air. "I was distracted. I was looking at your mouth instead of the tree line. I let my guard down because I wanted. He trailed off, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You wanted to be a man instead of a don," Arya finished for him. She stopped cleaning the wound and rested her hand on his chest right over his heart. It was beating slow and hard. "Don't apologize for that." "I have to," Dante said, his voice rough. "Because being a man gets people killed. Being the Don keeps them alive. I cannot afford to be the man, Arya. Not while you are here." He pulled away, breaking the contact. The loss of his touch felt like a physical coldness settling over her. "Finish the bandage," he commanded, his voice turning hard again, the walls slamming back up. "Then get some sleep. We are in lockdown until I find the leak. Nobody leaves this room." Arya finished taping the gauze in silence. She understood what he was doing. He was pushing her away for her own safety. He was retreating back into the monster because he believed the monster was the only thing that could save them. But as she walked back to the sofa to lie down beside her daughter, she knew it was too late. He had already let her in, and she had seen the terrified, loving man beneath the armor. 24 hours in a bunker does strange things to the perception of time. Day and night became irrelevant. The only measure of time was the rhythmic hum of the air filtration system and the beating of Arya's own heart. By the morning of the second day, the children were restless. The triplets were dismantling the furniture to build a fort. Mare was helping them, having been fully inducted into their chaotic little unit. Dante had spent the entire time in the corner, glued to his secure laptop and satellite phone, speaking in rapid-fire Italian. His mood was thunderous. The mole hunt was coming up empty. "Whoever it is," Dante said to Silas, who had come down to deliver food, "they are good. No unauthorized outgoing calls, no encrypted messages intercepted. The perimeter alarms were looped on a 10-second delay. That requires clearance level 4. Arya was sitting on the floor folding blankets, but her ears pricked up. Clearance level 4. That narrowed it down to the inner circle. The household staff, the senior guards. Silas looked exhausted. "I've interrogated the day shift. Nothing. I'm starting on the night crew now." "Dante, is it possible it was a directional microphone?" "Maybe they didn't know we were in the garden. They just got lucky." "Snipers don't rely on luck," Dante snapped. "They knew the time. They knew the location. Someone told them." Silas nodded and turned to leave. "I'll bring more coffee." "Wait," Arya said. Both men turned to look at her. The delay, Arya said, standing up. You said the perimeter alarms were looped, like in the movies, a recording playing over the real feed. Essentially, Dante said, impatient. Why? Because of the static, Arya said slowly, her mind racing back to the night before the attack. 2 nights ago I couldn't sleep. I was walking the hallway near the east wing. I heard a radio. It was crackling. Static. But not like bad reception. It sounded rhythmic. Dante's eyes narrowed. The digital radios don't have static. They are encrypted frequencies. Exactly, Arya said. It wasn't a guard's radio. It sounded like interference, like when you put a cell phone too close to a speaker. Dante looked at Silas. The air in the room shifted, charged with sudden realization. The baby monitors, Dante said. Silas went pale. The old system, in the nursery. We never removed the wiring when the boys outgrew it. If someone tapped into the hard line of the old nursery intercom, Dante said, his voice deadly quiet. They wouldn't need to send a signal out. They could just turn it into a transmitter, a listening device that bypasses the digital sweep. And the nursery, Arya added, her stomach churning, overlooks the rose garden. Who has access to the East Wing utility closet? Dante asked Silas. Silas hesitated. It's low security, housekeeping, maintenance, and the private tutor. Mr. Sterling. Arya frowned. The old man who teaches them French, he can barely walk. He walks fine when he thinks no one is watching. Leo piped up from the fort. Everyone froze. They turned to look at the 6-year-old. Leo poked his head out of the cushion. Fortress. Mr. Sterling runs to his car when it rains. He runs fast, and he has a burner phone. I saw it in his bag. Dante moved. He didn't run. He blurred. He grabbed his gun from the table and was at the steel door in a second. Silas, stay with them. Seal the door. If I don't come back in 10 minutes, initiate Protocol 0. Dante, Arya cried out, rushing toward him. He stopped his hand on the keypad. He looked back at her. The rage was there, but it was focused now. Cold. Calculating. Stay here, Arya, he commanded. He's in the house, she asked, breathless. The tutor. He's scheduled for a lesson at 2:00 p.m. Dante checked his watch. He's in the library, waiting. Dante opened the door and vanished into the darkness of the basement corridor. The door hissed shut, locking Arya in. But Arya Penelope was not a woman who waited well. She turned to Silas. The large man was checking his weapon, standing in front of the door. Protocol 0, Arya said. What is that? Silas didn't look at her. It means I collapse the ventilation shafts, and we wait for extraction. It means the house is compromised. He's walking into a trap, Arya said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. If Sterling is the mole, and he knows we're in lockdown, he knows Dante will come for him eventually. He's not just waiting to teach French. Dante can handle himself. Not if he's emotional, Arya argued. He's angry, Silas. He's not thinking clearly. He's going to storm in there to kill a traitor, but what if the traitor brought friends? Silas hesitated. He knew she was right. Dante had been unhinged since the garden. Watch the kids, Arya said, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from a side table. It was ridiculous, useless against a gun, but it was something. Ms. Penelope, I can't let you. You have to protect the children. That is your primary directive. My directive is to make sure your boss doesn't get a bullet in his head. Arya stood by the keypad. Open it, or I start screaming, and wake Mia up, and I promise you a screaming 6-year-old is worse than the Mafia." Silas looked at her. He saw the desperation, but also the fierce loyalty. He punched in the code. "You have 5 minutes," Silas warned. "Then I seal it for good." Arya slipped out into the hallway. The house was silent, dark, and cold. She moved barefoot across the marble, the candlestick heavy in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She crept up the stairs toward the library. The double doors were closed. She pressed her ear against the wood. She heard voices. "You really thought you could hide her?" A voice sneered. It wasn't the trembling voice of the old tutor. It was younger, sharper. Sterling dropping the act. "The Russos pay better, Mancini, and they promised me a seat at the table." "You won't have a seat," Dante's voice rumbled low and dangerous. "You'll have a shallow grave." "Maybe," Sterling laughed. "But not today." Click. The sound of a gun hammer being pulled back. Arya didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She didn't consider that she was a broke single mom in a thrift store blouse going up against a hitman. She gripped the brass candlestick with both hands, kicked the door open, and screamed, "Hey!" It was enough. Sterling, who had a gun pointed at Dante's chest, flinched his eyes, darting to the doorway for a split second. That split second was all Dante Mancini needed. He didn't shoot. He lunged. He covered the distance bit between them like a striking cobra, grabbing Sterling's wrist and twisting it with a sickening snap. The gun clattered to the floor. Dante drove his knee into Sterling's gut, doubling him over, then slammed the man's head onto the desk. Silence. Dante stood over the unconscious traitor, his chest heaving. He slowly turned his head to look at the doorway. Arya stood there, holding the candlestick like a baseball bat, panting. Dante looked at the unconscious hitman, then at the candlestick, then at Arya. His eyes were wide, the adrenaline blowing his pupils wide. "You," he breathed, taking a step toward her. "You are completely insane." "I was helping," Arya gasped, dropping the heavy brass object. Her knees gave out. Dante caught her before she hit the floor. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking. The mighty Dante Mancini was shaking. "You saved my life," he whispered into her skin. "We're even," Arya managed to say, wrapping her arms around his waist. Dante pulled back, framing her face with his hands. The intensity in his gaze scorched her. There were no more walls, no more boss and nanny. There was just a man and a woman who had walked through fire together. "No," Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are not even. We are just beginning." And this time, when he leaned in, no sniper interrupted them. He kissed her. It was a kiss of possession, of relief, of a promise that terrified and thrilled her. It tasted of danger and survival. But as they broke apart, breathless, the radio on Sterling's belt crackled to life. "Asset is down. Move in. Burn the house." Dante froze. He looked at Arya, his eyes hardening to diamond. "They aren't just sending a sniper," he said, pulling her toward the door. "They're sending an army." The run back to the basement was a blur of motion and terror. The house, once a silent museum of grief, was now a war zone. Glass shattered in the distance. The muffled thump, thump, thump of suppressed gunfire echoed from the upper floors. Dante shoved Arya and the unconscious Sterling into the hallway, then dragged them toward the secret entrance. He punched the code, and the heavy steel door hissed open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fear. Silas stood up, his weapon raised, but lowered it instantly when he saw Dante. The triplets and Mia were huddled in the corner, eyes wide. "They are inside," Dante said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He dumped Sterling's body in the corner. Silas, give me the heavy assault rifle. You take the sidearm. Guard the door from the inside. Dante, Arya breathless, grabbing his arm. You can't go out there alone. You said it's an army. Dante turned to her. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away a smudge of dirt on her cheek. I am not alone. I have everything to fight for. For 2 years I fought because I wanted to die. Today I fight because I want to live. He looked over her shoulder at the children. Keep them safe. If I don't come back, don't you dare, Arya hissed, tears finally spilling over. Don't you dare leave me with these 4 kids alone. You come back, Dante Mancini. That is an order. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes, ma'am. He grabbed the rifle and vanished into the corridor. The steel door sealed shut with a final tomb-like clang. For 20 minutes, hell reigned above them. Arya sat on the floor, her arms wrapped around all 4 children. She hummed the lullaby she used to sing to Mia, a soft melody battling against the vibrations of explosions shaking the ceiling. Dust rained down on them. Leo buried his face in her shirt. Mia held Enzo's hand. They were a single, terrified knot of humanity. Then silence. Absolute ringing silence. Arya held her breath. Silas stood by the door, sweat dripping down his temple, his finger on the trigger. The keypad beeped. Silas tensed. Arya stopped breathing. The door groaned open. Dante stood there. His shirt was torn, his face was bruised, and he was covered in dust and plaster. But he was standing. Behind him, through the corridor, Arya could see morning light filtering through a broken window. Is it over? She whispered. Dante dropped the rifle. He walked over to them, his legs heavy, and collapsed to his knees in front of Arya and the children. He gathered them all into a massive, crushing hug. He buried his face in Arya's shoulder, shaking with the aftershocks of adrenaline. It is finished, he rasped. The Russos are gone. The police are on the payroll. They will handle the cleanup. We are safe. The relief was physical, a wave that crashed over them. The triplets started crying, finally releasing the fear. Mia patted Dante's messy hair. You look like a monster, Dante, Mia said seriously. Dante pulled back, looking at the little girl, then at his sons, and finally at Arya. His eyes were shining. I was a monster, Mia. But I think I'm ready to be a dad again. 3 months later. The kitchen smelled of caramelized bacon and fresh coffee. Sunlight streamed through the new reinforced windows, bouncing off the freshly painted walls. The dark, gloomy mausoleum was gone, replaced by a home filled with light and noise. Arya stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. She wasn't wearing a thrift store suit. She was wearing a silk robe and a diamond ring on her finger that was heavy enough to anchor a boat. Incoming! Leo shouted. The triplets and Mia thundered into the kitchen, a chaotic whirlwind of backpacks and laughter. They scrambled onto the stools. Matteo pushed me, Enzo yelled. Did too. Enough, a deep voice rumbled. Dante walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a black t-shirt. He looked younger, lighter. He walked over to the boys, ruffled their hair, and kissed Mia on the forehead. Then he walked to the stove. He wrapped his arms around Arya from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. The security team is ready for the school run, he murmured against her ear. And the adoption papers for Mia are on my desk for you to sign. Arya leaned back into him, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart. She turned in his arms, looping hers around his neck. You know, she smiled, Most nannies get fired after 48 hours. I think I've overstayed my welcome. Dante kissed her a slow, deep kiss that tasted of syrup and forever. You were never the nanny, Aria, he whispered. You were the salvation. He picked up a piece of bacon, winked at his sons, and smiled a real, genuine smile. Now feed the army. We have a life to live. And that is how Aria Penelope, a woman with $42 to her name, walked into the lion's den and tamed the beast. She didn't use weapons or threats. She used the one thing the Mancini family had forgotten existed: love. In the end, the most dangerous man in New York wasn't brought to his knees by a rival Don or the FBI. He was brought to his knees by a plate of pancakes and a woman who refused to be afraid of the dark. It turns out, sometimes the only way to fix a broken family is to add a few more pieces to it. Wow, what a journey. From a desperate single mom to the queen of the Mafia underworld. If you enjoyed this story of danger, romance, and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. I want to know, do you think Dante was right to keep Aria in the dark for so long? Or should he have told her the truth about the danger sooner? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next thrilling story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.